Wyoming. He is proud that his work was the first published work of the new University of Wyoming Press. The book is available for sale following this evening's program at the State Museum store, and Michael will be available for signing also. Turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Gosh, can I sit?
If you want to.
I don't know. After a while, maybe tough hearing my groaning to get back up. Maybe I better just stay up. Well, if you had been in Wyoming in 1900, you might have come across a scene like this, and this is Merritt Dana Houghton, pictured up in the upper right, sketching a scene below him, and this is over by encampment. Houghton sketched views like this of mines. He sketched bird's eye view drawings of towns like this one of encampment or that one of Dillon, Montana. He sketched really interesting topographical views like this one of the Grand Encampment Mining District. He sketched animal views like that one, like this one right here. I'll talk about animal history. He sketched historic places like this one of Fort Fetterman. He sketched and painted beautiful ranch drawings across Wyoming. He sketched interiors of mines, and he sketched sheep wagons. He did all of this between about 1891 and about 1915. And one of the things I did in the book that I've been really trying to work on is to figure out where all of the sketches depict, and then to get a sense of where he went from place to place, as well as trying to get a sense of, where is his core work done. And I'll talk a little bit about the process of finding locations for these as well in the presentation. It's really broken up into 4 big parts. I'm going to start off with big picture stuff and then talk really biography, and then his focus in Wyoming, and then moving north. He really started around 1905, went beyond the southwest or southeast Wyoming, across Wyoming, and then into Montana, Idaho, and Washington State, where he died in Spokane in 1919 during the flu epidemic. So let's go back. This is the topography of the El Rey mining district outside of encampment. And this is sort of a self-portrait, which I like. Now, the big picture of this, I like to start off with a big picture. And this is his view of the Boswell Ranch. The Boswell Ranch is on the Big Laramie River, right along the Colorado-Wyoming border, just to the south of Woods Landing. You sort of know that area. And he did this sketch around 1902, and this one I believe is about 6 feet long. Really? And the way he would have done this is he would have started drawing it in pencil and then went over it in India ink. And this is India ink with ink wash. And the ink wash, the ink wash is the sort of gray tones. And what he would have done is taken solid India ink and diluted it at various levels to get different shades of gray. And this, he really does 2 different kinds of ranch views. This is what I would call a landscape view. Looks like you're looking through a wide-angle lens of a camera. He also did a portrait view, which is much more focused in on just the ranch and its buildings. As Robin said, I became interested in Houghton's work quite by accident. In 1988, I was rephotographing J.E. Stimson pictures, and I was in Buffalo. And I was trying to figure out where Stimson stood to take a picture, and I couldn't figure it out. And so I went into the local Jim Gatchell Museum, and they had this view of Buffalo, 1903, or actually 1904. And basically, this was a map of what Stimson was seeing. And so I could look down and see the buildings in Stimson's view from this aerial view, so I know exactly where to go. And as I was going around the state in 1987 and 1980, I kept seeing more and more house drawings. I saw ranch drawings. I saw other bird's eye view drawings. And in 1991, 92, I started trying to put together a catalog of his work. And so I went to Rollins. I went to Medicine Bow. I went to Encampment. I went to Saratoga. I went to Cheyenne. I went to Laramie. I basically, in those days, if you wanted to do research, you went to the place and read newspapers, read archives. You did it all there. And in 1994, see there. There we go. In 1994, I published an article in Montana Magazine of Western History, 10 Sketches of Promise, because I basically had everything that I thought would ever be known about Merritt Dana Houghton in this article. I actually even went to Spokane where he died. I was at a history conference in Seattle, and I took Amtrak over to Spokane for a day. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of that. Well, about 1994, 95, another thing came along that had nothing to do with Houghton. You may have heard of it. It's called the internet. The internet fundamentally changed how historians do work and do research. And I was asked in 2018 to go back to encampment and give a presentation about Houghton. This was almost 30 years. Actually, it's 27 years since I had done it before, which at that time was exactly half of my life ago. And I went back, and I told him, well, I'll be happy to do it if I can find my slides, because everything was in slide format, if I can scan them. And I thought, I wonder if there's anything new I can find out about Houghton. There was so much more information available via things like newspapers.com, the Wyoming Digital History, Wyoming Digital Newspaper Project, Ancestry.com, that I said, wow, this is so much more. I need to put it together into a book, and that's what it became of it. So the bigger context of his work falls into the sense of bird's eye view drawings. And this guy, John Reps, was really the leading authority on bird's eye view drawings. And he did about 6 or 7 books about bird's eye view drawings around the country, primarily in the East. And what he said about them was that they're most popular between about 1865 and about 1920. And so this is the period in which America is urbanizing after the Civil War. The 1920 census is the first to show that half of all Americans are living in urban areas. And people living in cities want to see how their cities looked and want to see how their cities grew. And these bird's eye view drawings that emerged in this time period were very popular to do that. They also were promotional because they always showed the towns the best possible way that they could. Okay, these are 2 examples from this time period, one of Cheyenne from 1882 and one of Green River from 1875. Reps put together this book, which was a catalog of all known bird's eye view drawings, and it included all of 2 Houghton drawings. And the fact that I knew that there were, after cataloging them, probably 30 town views, I knew that there was more to be said about Houghton than what Reps did, because he really didn't know anything about it. So how did he do it? Well, we have 2 sort of ways that we know how he did this. In 1983, Candy Bolton, who is a historian over at Encampment, interviewed Wilbur Toothaker. And Wilbur Toothaker was an elderly man at the time, and he remembered Houghton coming to his ranch, asking his parents if he could draw the ranch for sale to them, and then going up on a hillside opposite the ranch and sketching it. He sketched it in pencil, he brought it down, showed it to everybody, and then once they said that was okay, he went back and went over it and inked an ink wash. And he said, we all went out and watched him, and that's me looking at it, which I think is great. You can't beat firsthand account, right? The other thing that Reps tells us that in these bird's eye view drawings of towns, generally what people would do is they would get a map of the town, and then they would go through with a booklet and basically sketch every building by street. And then they would take these preliminary sketches, and they could do 2 things with them. One, they could sell them to store owners as a sketch of their building, or they also went through and then compiled it into their masterpiece, into the bird's eye view drawing. Now, to do that, they had to pick an angle. If you notice, it's usually beautiful mountains. You notice the view of Buffalo, a view of Sheridan, I'll show you in just a minute. Does it look east towards the plains, or does it look west towards the Bighorns? West towards the Bighorns. Always the mountain view in the distance. And so then he would just put this together, which is really sort of amazing, because he wasn't in a balloon, he wasn't in an airplane. This was just his imagination of seeing how this would look from the air. He also did historical archaeology. This is a newspaper the clipping from the Laramie Daily Boomerang from March 21st, 1898, talking about his work at Port Fetterman, which was long gone when he went out and sketched that in 1898. And it says, Mr. M.D. Houghton of Laramie, who is traveling through Wyoming, visiting the sites of old landmarks and restoring to view old posts that have been destroyed for years, is in Casper. There being no photographs or drawings of old Fort Fetterman, he visited the famous spot with old frontiersmen, unearthed the foundations of the old huts and the stone fireplaces, the early things left whereby one could secure an understanding of the buildings as they stood. Then Mr. Houghton, being told the description of each building, drew a pencil sketch of it. Criticized and corrected, a new sketch was drawn and submitted to other patriarchs of the plains and of years and years ago, until finally completed and approved, even in the most minute detail, it was worked into a fine, large Indian ink drawing. And so he basically did historical archaeology. He went out there, figured out where the buildings were, talked to people about what they should look like, drew the landscape, and then fitted everything together. And the newspapers at the time talked about him doing restoration or restoring. Which today we would talk about that with physically restoring, but he was restoring the view of what these places looked like. And it's just wonderful. This came out, we'll talk a little bit about where that came out of. Beep. This is the magnum opus. This is his bird's eye view of Sheridan. 4 feet tall, 8 feet wide. Hangs in the city of Sheridan. The Sheridan Post of July 25th, 1905 says, artist M.D. Houghton has been working the past 2 weeks making preliminary sketches of every house in Sheridan. So he was going through sketching every house, every building, and then putting this together. And again, we have the Bighorns. You can see, if you know Sheridan, Big Goose Creek coming down, Little Goose Creek coming down, Coffeen Avenue, Main Street. The Sheridan Inn is over here. He hits all the high points that he needs to hit. Go ahead. So as I'm showing you these, a couple things to think about. And these are 2 drawings that he made of encampment. One is angle of view. What is his angle? What is he trying to tell you about his vantage point that he selected? So encampment was the copper booming town, and the copper smelter he put front and center in this image. This is an industrial image clearly to show to investors. Okay. This is another view of encampment, really a pastoral view, in which he literally has hid the smelter behind the hill. It's in the background. So you can see this is maybe for prospective homeowners or somebody like that. He also oftentimes put himself and his wife in his images. Down here, sort of leading to what you're going to see. These are great examples of the architecture of the time period, of what was there. We'll talk more about people and animals, but just sort of some things to think about it, as well as the medium. And most of them are black and white, pen and ink, but there are some color ones. Okay. So his life. Well, he was born in 1846 to Rufus and Lucy Houghton in Otsego, Michigan, which is sort of near Battle Creek in south central Michigan. His father was a tanner. His father was actually the child of a Revolutionary War soldier. His father was born in 1792. Okay, so pretty crazy. He was one of 9 children. Okay. The 1860 census has him moving west outside of Chicago, living with 4 siblings, and his mother was living in a neighboring farm. His father had disappeared. We don't know what happened to his father, other than that he died in 1865. We also know that during the Civil War, his older brother George enlisted in the 104th Illinois Infantry and became a Congressional Medal of Honor winner during the war.
Not a winner, a recipient.
Thank you.
You don't win that.
I understand that. Okay, so he is a recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Okay, next. Merritt, however, was in college during the Civil War. And this is one of those things that I found on Ancestry.com. You can see him. He was attending Olivet, which is back in central Michigan. Olivet was one of the first co-educational colleges in America. And its first class graduated in 1864. Merritt was taking preparatory work, which is basically like high school in preparation to go into a college or university. And you can see him listed in the course catalog: Merritt D. Houghton, Peoria, Illinois. Merritt D. Houghton, Peoria, Illinois. Merritt D. Houghton, Merritt Dana Houghton, Peoria, Illinois, 1864, 65, and 66. What kind of classes did he have? Well, he had classics. Go ahead. He could take Latin, arithmetic, grammar, elocution and orthography, Greek, Caesar. It was really classical preparation. What you don't see here is art. And they did have an art instructor. Miss Sarah Benedict was one of the first graduates of the college in 1864, and she was an instructor in drawing and painting. Don't know whether he took it or not. What is really interesting, though, is I contacted all of that and told them I was working on this guy who is a sketch, had done bird's eye view sketches out in Wyoming, and they said, that's really interesting because there was another guy from the same time period who did the same thing in Arizona. C.J. Dyer was a classmate for 2 of those years and sketched Phoenix and Prescott. Now, you said you grew up in Phoenix. I don't mean any offense by this, but Phoenix has never been that green. Okay? Which also shows sort of the promotional aspect of this. Born the same year, attended all of it for 2 of the years. You sort of think, well, maybe they knew each other, maybe they took classes together. You know, you don't know. But this was a very popular form of illustration in the post-Civil War period. So it's not that unusual, just sort of interesting that 2 people from the same small college doing the same kind of work. He actually was the mayor of Phoenix for about half of a year. Thank you. Houghton, after attending all of it for 3 years, went west back to Illinois, where he went to the normal school and graduated in 1868. Now, if you graduate from a normal school, that makes you a teacher. So he basically finished his teaching training, and we can see him as part of the graduating class here. 3 years later, we find the first example of his artwork because he won first place in pencil drawing in the Ottawa County Fair in 1871. That's a newspapers.com find. You would never have found that back in the day unless you were living in Ottawa and reading the paper every day. But this is just, you know, typing his name into a digital research box and finding that out. Go ahead. Well, by 1872, it moved west to Omaha. We find him in the city directories, also on Ancestry.com, living with his Civil War hero brother George. They're running a nursery on Douglas Avenue, which is one of the main streets through Omaha. And we see him there between about 72 and about 75, 76. We also know that he met this young lady, Fanny Apley, who would eventually become his bride, and she was a school teacher. Now, she had come from Ohio and was living with a married sister in Omaha, and had been there actually before he got there. And in 1875, they were married. This is their marriage certificate, also at Ancestry.com find. But you can see Merritt D. Houghton of Omaha, born in Michigan, to Rufus Houghton. All that information just sort of verifying that stuff that we've already found. There are no known images of her. There are no photographs. The only thing that I have found are these when he includes them in his own drawings. And so those are 3 different examples of that. And there's a few little biographical sketches I'll point out to you as we go through. So they're married in 1875. By 1878, they're in Wyoming. And there's a mention that Mrs. Houghton has come to Laramie from Carbon. He drew Carbon in 1876. It's hard to tell whether he was there or not in 1876 because he did a lot of historical drawings, like I've already showed you. So it's not really clear. The earliest known mention we have is 1878. We know that by 1880, he was the superintendent of schools for Carbon County. And so he was living in Rawlins. This is the census from 1880, where he's listed as a photographist. Okay, so he has a photographic studio. What I love about this is, you know, Carbon, he had a tendency to draw things more beautiful than they are. And Carbon does not look very appealing there. And to think that he's making it look better makes you think just how bad it actually was. Okay, living in a dugout along a creek mining coal is not really probably the best thing that he would have wanted. We see him in the 1878 Cheyenne paper listed here as getting a salary for the superintendent of school. Interestingly, he was a Republican when he was in Rawlins. We'll talk a little bit about that later. We'll go back just a second. So they also have listed in here on the census Charles, an adopted son. Only time Charles ever appears anything associated with him. A later neighbor said he did not turn out well. They never spoke of him. So I don't know what that means. If he'd been born in Wyoming, it would have been easier to follow probably in the census. This is where they're born. Being born in New York, adopted, that's really hard to try to trace anybody doing ancestry or genealogy. All right. So we have there's about 24 examples of his photography work available at archives and on the internet. This is a church in Rawlins, obviously the Green River. This is his portrait of Jim Baker, the mountain man who lived in Savory. This is being taken in his studio in 1879 in Cheyenne. It was difficult being an itinerant, being a photographer at this time period. Basically, if you opened a studio, and here's his advertisement for his studio in Rawlins, everybody came, got their picture taken, and once everybody had a picture, now you're sort of stuck. You know, somebody like J. Stimson, who had a studio here, got a contract with the railroad. And so that gave him, he was paid to go out and take pictures for the railroad. If you didn't have that, it was pretty tough to be a photographer. You had to always go find new markets because you saturated them fairly quickly. We see that he went up and photographed on the Wind River Reservation, photographed Shoshone and Arapaho people. So he was out doing that. He obviously went there. There's another view that he made of South Pass City, but it was difficult. Go ahead. We know that by 1884, he had moved on to Buffalo. He had moved up to Johnson County. Buffalo is very much the frontier by this time period. This advertisement here shows up in the first issue of the Bighorn Sentinel of October 18th, 1884. It was crazy for me because I did my master's thesis at UW on the town of Bighorn. And I remember going and actually opening up, they had bound volumes, and opening up the first page of the Bighorn Sentinel and saying, what's M.D. Houghton doing here? It was just sort of crazy to see it. A couple of views of the Johnson County Courthouse in Buffalo, and then the only known view of one of his roundup pictures. Okay, so his ad stayed in the Bighorn newspaper for about 2 years. I don't know how long he stayed there. His wife, Fanny, was still in Rawlins, and we have the only example of her voice, go ahead, is in a letter to the editor that she wrote to the Carbon County Journal in June of 1884, responding to an article that she saw in a women's magazine about women's suffrage in Wyoming. And she says in this long article, so this is, I found this accidentally. I was actually looking at the Wyoming Digital Papers about what was on this page and looked over and saw Mrs. F. Apley Houghton, and it wasn't actually indexed. I couldn't find it indexing. I actually just accidentally found it. But she's responding to a national article about women's suffrage in Wyoming. And she says, my husband has never told me for whom to vote, nor in any way tried to influence me in regard to my vote. He says the hardest thing he ever had to find out was how a woman voted. Granting that a woman is emotional, cannot and does she not have principle and know what is right? The majority of women of Wyoming have too much principle to be governed by husbands or fathers if they do not think their friends are right. I love that because it's the only example of her. And she's clearly a smart, good writer and an equal match to him. And that's what later description said as well. Go ahead. By 1887, they rejoined and moved to Laramie. And Laramie was a good place for them. Obviously, they were both well educated. This is the home of the University of Wyoming as of 1886. And so it's a good place. This is a later drawing that he made of Laramie, but I like it because he's put Old Main right there in the foreground of his image looking west. They stay in Laramie from about 1887 to about 1904-05. So they spend a lot of time there, or at least they have a house there together for a long time. All right. A couple examples of some of the things that they're doing there. He runs for office a couple different times. I told you he was a Republican in Rawlins. In 1892, he runs for a county surveyor as a Democrat. In 1893, he runs as in the People's Party, or the Populists. And by 1902, he's running as a socialist. So unlike unlike Wyoming, he's moving left constantly, and he never wins anything. When there's like 15 people running for this office as the Socialist Party, he's like 15. So I don't know why he was running for these. Maybe it was just a good person that he said he'd put his name up for that. I don't know. His wife shows up a lot in the society pages, and she was really involved in women's clubs. And so you can see her. There's one example in the book I talked about. She's she's holding having a psychology club meeting. She had a seance at her house another time. She gave a presentation on Formosa, or Taiwan as we would know it. So she's obviously educated and knows, is interested in those kinds of things. She also had a small shop for a while in the 1890s as well in Laramie. Okay, let's load up part 2. I broke this down. The first night I gave this, it crashed because there were so many images. So I've broken it up into 4 different parts. Find it? Okay, go ahead and beat me. So starting in 1891, he took on a new career, that being an illustrator. And he published the first Wyoming Illustrated newspaper, the Wyoming Illustrated Monthly, in 1891. And this was basically a promotional newspaper for Laramie. And there were articles about, let's see, what do I talk about? Kind of quirky things. The state of surgery in the state. Don't do that.
Sorry, nobody can see it on the.
We had all flipped away.
There we go.
And it also included 25 of his original images. Now, as you look at these, they're going to look different than any other reproduced image that he has because they're following an older style of engraving, line engraving, in which to darken things, you make more and more lines. All the rest of his reproductions are halftones. And so you'll see that as we go through that. And most people don't know anything about this. This is something I found as I was researching the book. They don't know about this little part of his life. Go ahead. So what did he sketch? Keystone, which is over just west of Laramie, an interior view. He sketched Chimney Rock and Red Buttes, south and southwest of Laramie. Pinkham's Castle was past Woods Landing, sort of over by just near Cowdery, Colorado. So if you go to encampment, not over the mountains, but around them, you'd go through there, and then Woods Landing. So you go to Woods Landing to get to Pinkham's Castle. He sketched Laramie businesses. These would have been good promoters of his work, and these were all downtown stores. Go ahead. He sketched government. He sketched the high school, the university, the county courthouse. He sketched residences. And so these are all leading citizens of Laramie. It's funny, at first I wasn't even sure if he sketched these because many of them aren't signed. He always signed in the lower right or lower left. And as I was looking at this one, I noticed his signature was in the sidewalk crack right here to sort of hide that, which is kind of cool. Well, so as we read these, as I said, it's a different style. So these clouds are different because it's lines. It's very much his MO. Okay, it's promotional images. There's good attention to detail. You know, the difference of being a sketch artist rather than a photographer gets exactly what's there. Okay, a sketch artist, an illustrator, picks and chooses. There's never piles of junk sitting next to somebody's ranch house. There's always smoke billowing out of smokestacks because he's always trying to promote the best image that he can. The reason why most historians don't know anything about this work is that this illustrated monthly newspaper lasted all of 1 month.
Oh,
Only January. You can go ahead to the
he
next one.
got all that in there.
1 month. He was out scanning to go do the second issue, but this was by prescription and he hadn't got enough subscriptions. The next issue was going to be Rollins, but it didn't happen. Instead, within 6 months, former territorial governor and UW President John Hoyt hired him to work on the Wyoming State Journal as the artist and general agent. He did this for a couple of years, and then that went bankrupt. Now, if you think about the 1890s, Rick, what do we know about the 1890s economically?
Well, usually I'm not doing very well.
Right, because it's the worst depression in American history. Okay, and so this was a very difficult time to start up a new business. And so by probably about 1898, 1899, he turned back to his education. Go ahead. And he began teaching. And he went out to teach on ranch schools or on the Laramie Plains. And he went places that I had never heard of on the Laramie Plains. And one of the things I started to do was to map where all of these ranches are that he was sketching and working at. Go ahead. So I know he went north of Laramie, up by Laramie Peak, William Kenny Ranch. He was up here northeast of Medicine Bow at a place called Garrett. Anybody ever heard of Garrett? The Garrett Post Office. He was up there. He was over by Rock River. So these are all north. And then this one, the ranch of KP Nickel, is east of,
Tom Horton.
yes, Tom Horton. Well, I was going to ask. Okay, so this is the only color image from this time period on the Laramie Plains, and I think he must have known its historical significance and went over and wanted to document that. Okay, wait, let's go back. So as you look at these, and some of these are reproductions from a 1955 book, but these are all portrait images for the most part. Tight on the ranch, cows in the front, maybe some farm utensils. They're pretty tight portrait images, like if you were looking through with a normal lens, except for the William Kenny one. Go ahead. He went south of Laramie. This is down by Tie Siding, down by Dale Creek. The John Getz and the James Hardman ranches are both towards Camel Rock, sort of southwest of Laramie, as is the Lundquist Ranch. The Tatham Brothers Ranch is actually just across the border in Colorado. And so those are all other ones that he did. Go ahead. And then he went west Laramie. You can start to see the foothills of the Medicine Bow here, and it looks like Centennial. These go up towards Arlington and that area. So he's really getting around the Laramie Plains. Go ahead. So I want to share with you a little bit of the process of how you find where these are. Go ahead. So we'll start with the Lundquist Ranch. And this one's great because, and I'll show you a bigger version of this, but this says District 17. He actually put the schoolhouse front and center. So, you know, yeah, it's great for the ranch, but the school is why I'm there, right? Okay, so to do that, what I would do is go to the Bureau of Land Management homepage, and you type in Lundquist in Albany County, Wyoming, and it would come up with documents of homestead records. Okay, and then you click on one of the homestead records, and it will give you the aliquots. We know what an aliquot is? The scientists back there? Okay, aliquots are the legal descriptions, the southeast quarter of the northwest quarter, and it would plot it on the map. Well, it's really hard to find anything like that. And so I would type the township range section numbers into another website, go ahead, down here, and it would convert it to GPS coordinates. And from the GPS coordinates, oh, give me back.
Two operators.
Well, one that doesn't know what he's doing. Actually, there we go. So once you have the GPS coordinates, you can go to Google Earth, type the GPS coordinates in, and then you're going to get to about a square mile. So it's not going to just pop you right down on it, but you can dig around until you figure out where that ranch is, and then you know. And you can put a pinpoint in it, and that's the Wooden Shoe Ranch or the Lundquist Ranch on Google Earth. Once you have enough of these, then go ahead. You can go to this site, ArcGIS. Anybody ever looked at this? This is a really great site. It's really GIS, Geographical Information Systems. And if you have images and you have GPS coordinates, as you would scroll through this, every time you came up to one of these pointing at it, the image would pop up. And so it links the arc with the spot, which is pretty cool as well. And all of that stuff is free. Okay.
If you're smart.
Well, so as I said, you know, if you're a folklorist, you can look at Houghton drawing and find a lot of information. You know, somebody who really knows this stuff would probably tell you that that type of fence came from a certain ethnic group, or this kind of barn was associated with somebody, or those kind of cattle were brought to Wyoming at a certain time period. And these images are primary sources for looking at all this kind of stuff. Okay, well, his work was noticed by C.G. Coutant, Charles Griffin Coutant, who was a newspaper editor, and he was going to write a 3-volume history of Wyoming to come out in 1899. And he hired Houghton to do the sketches of the Overland Trail and the Oregon Trail sites. And in his description in volume 1, go ahead, he says, most of the illustrations were done by Wyoming artist M.D. Houghton, who produced them after much study and investigation. They're not ideal drawings, but were made with the assistance of pioneers who took the trouble to visit with the artist, the locality, explain the fort buildings, bridges, etc. These drawings have stood the test of critical examination, which is exactly what the newspapers were saying. So they are well done. The only problem is that this was another subscription 3-volume set, of which only 1 volume appeared. Okay, so there's only 1 volume, and it's primarily eastern Wyoming on the Oregon Trail. Go ahead. So these are the images from Coutant, Fort Laramie, Labonte Stage Station, Fort Laramie in 1889, Bridger's Ferry, which is up by Orange Junction, Fort Fetterman I showed you, the Deer Creek Station, which is Glen Rock, and Fort Casper. And so just think, though, that he went to each one of these places and did the archaeology, talked to old timers, and did the work to produce these historically accurate drawings. So he also then began preparing in 1899, while Coutant was waiting to find out about the next volume. He was already busy going out and sketching more ranches. And I think the second volume was going to be something like Great Men or Great Ranches or Historic Ranches, because that's a lot of what he does. And he not only signs these, but he also dates a few of them. So it helps us to sort of map out where he's going. So go ahead. So he went up here to Split Rock, or actually this is near Jeffrey City on the Sweetwater, up to Pinedale. Go ahead. Pinedale, Big Piney. That's actually the town of Big Piney. This is just south of Big Piney, also near Big Piney. This is near Fontanelle or Fontanelle Reservoir. This is near Kemmer, Opal, and then a couple of Fort Bridger and one of Fort Supply, the Mormon Fort. I was just out there last week, and one of the local historians took me around and showed me where all these things were. So I have a little bit more knowledge about some of these, but we'll look at these a little closer. I think what he probably did is came over to Rawlins, because there was another image that I know of, but don't have the sketch of a ranch up here by Muddy Gap. And so Muddy Gap, and then the Sweetwater, and then he came up over South Pass and into the upper Green River Valley. Go ahead. Beautiful images. That first one of the McIntosh Ranch is very much a landscape view. Big, wide angle view. I mean, the ranch is really actually kind of small in that, but we get the Rattlesnake Hills in the background. I just love the color in that. When I was giving presentations on Houghton 30 years ago, people would bring their own versions of things that they'd kept in the family. And they were kind enough to let me go out and photograph them. And so I took slides of all of those. I have no idea where this is now, but I found my slide from 1992 of it and could reproduce it, which is pretty cool. The EP Steel Ranch is actually now, I think, an upward bound training facility outside of Pinedale. Sutton's Bootjack Ranch is near Pinedale. William Sutton had actually lived in Carbon, so maybe Houghton knew him from Carbon. This is the Wyoming Range in the distance. So take a good look at that, because I'm going to show you another one here in just a minute. The Andrews Ranch on Horse Creek is very close to this as well. This was an unknown. I found this in Spokane at the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture, and it just said Wyoming Ranch. I sent this to my friend Janita Summers, who lives in Big Piney as the local historian, and she said, those mountains, that's the Wyoming Range. And she started doing research in old maps, went out, found the site, and identified where that was. And then we found the name Harvey DeKalb also in some Green River newspapers. He was only there for maybe 3 years. But this is just a beautiful drawing of his ranch. The old 67 is near near Big Piney. The ranch of D.B. Budd, this is actually the founder of Big Piney. And that building is just out right across from the high school. But he had a pet elk that Houghton included as well. The Mule Shoe is nearby. This one of the Mickelson Ranch, or the Mickelson Circle Ranch, it's also near Big Piney. And I was out there the other day, and this building right here is the oldest building in Sublette County, built in 1878 and still there, which is pretty cool. And then the ranch of Roni Pomeroy, I forgot to show you on the Sutton Ranch, it said, I think June 11th, 1899. Pomeroy says July 8th, 1899. So we sort of know where he started and where he ended up that summer going through this. And this is Fontanelle. The book came out in January, and about 2 weeks later, I got an email from a guy in Seattle who said, I just got a copy of your book to see if my Houghton drawing was in it. And it wasn't.
Oh, dear.
Because he never shared it with me. But his is of the James Wright Ranch on Hams Fork, just to the north of Kemmer. And this is it. And so he sent it to me, and actually the publisher now is letting me create a website of any Houghtons found since publication that we can add more to it. What I also like about this is right down here it says C.G. Coutant, History of Wyoming. So it was clear that Houghton was doing this for that second volume. This ranch, this view of Robertson's ranch of Opal is unique because it's on one sheet of paper, the landscape and the portrait view. The landscape view shows the bustling town of Opal with the Oregon shoreline cutting through, and then the near view down here. And this is the ranch sort of across here. It's all the way over there. Let's see. Does it actually work?
There you go.
So that view is what you're seeing.
Oh, okay.
That's scary to do that. Okay. He went down and did a couple paintings of Fort Bridger. I was at Fort Bridger last week. They seem to think that this was made in 1889, which it wasn't. It was made in 1899. And then an earlier view of the original Fort Bridger and then Fort Supply. A couple more glimpses appear of the Houghtons. This is the census from 1900. They were renting a home near the Laramie High School. He's listed as a draftsman. In the 1930s, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration or Works Project Administration, sent people out to do interviews of old timers, and they interviewed a neighbor of the Houghtons. The Houghtons had been dead for 20 years, but she wrote that they were very much devoted to each other and much alike. Both well educated, had high ideals. They always read the best literature, and they had many volumes of the best books in their library. Mr. Houghton was a rather small man, and while not husky, did any work that presented itself, this being rather unusual for an artistic temperament. He was a wonderful instructor and was much in demand. School districts felt very lucky when they could secure his services. He was a fine example of the youth. He was a very moral man. He did not drink or use tobacco, and no one ever heard him use bad language. Mrs. Houghton was a full 6 feet tall.
Wow.
But frail and had very poor health. She had cataract surgery in the 1890s. She rode a bicycle, wore bloomers, a visor cap, and very thick glasses. Sounds like a suffragette to me. Okay. I suppose she did present quite a figure, for mischievous boys hooted at her and little girls giggled. It made me indignant, for I knew her real worth. After all, what is a little shabbiness in comparison to a brilliant mind? I like that for an example. Well, he did a couple more sketches right around the turn of the century. He sketched Fort Collins in 1899. We know this because the Fort Collins newspapers said he was visiting and doing this in January of 1899. If you know Fort Collins, College Avenue, Old Town, and Colorado A&M, CSU, right there with Long Peak in the distance. Gold Hill is over in the Snowy Range. Okay, we doing okay so far? Okay, I'm sweating. Drink.
You said the Sweetwater Ranch was near the Rattlesnake. The Rattlesnake Mountains are in Carbon County.
Well, that's the Sweetwater River.
Okay,
So it's near Jeffrey. It's just west of where Jeffrey City.
okay.
What's the proper verb tense for Jeffrey City? Was? Is? I don't know anymore.
Ghost town.
Let's look at encampment. So go ahead. His main focus is encampment. And between about 1902 and 1905, he does more of his work in encampment. There are more known illustrations he made of encampment than any place else. He's there. He shows up almost weekly in the Grand Encampment Herald and in the Dillon Doublejack, the two newspapers of the Grand Encampment copper area. The copper boom had started in the 1890s, but really peaked in 1902 when they built the world's longest aerial tramway to go from this Ferris Haggerty mine across, there I am again, across through the town to the smelter. I think that technological marvel is probably what induced him to go over there and do sketches. After all, he could sketch ranches, he could sketch mines for prospective investors. It was really a lucrative business. As I said, he shows up all the time in the paper, like the Grand Encampment Herald. M.D. Houghton, the sketch artist, has been in Dillon during the week. The Laramie Republican, the Saratoga Sun, let's see, it was made from a pencil drawing by M.D. Houghton. M.D. Houghton in the Laramie Republican, and the Saratoga Sun. He just pops up over and over, and his images are being reproduced in the newspapers as well. He also produces two books, about 40 pages each, but they're basically promotional books. A Portfolio of Wyoming Views, 1903, he prints 1,000 copies, sells out in 2 months. And both of these were published by the Grand Encampment Herald, by the newspaper. Then he publishes Views of Southern Wyoming Copper Belt Edition. That one's actually out before the first one is sold. He prints 3,000 copies of the second book. As far as I can tell, never sells it out. And so that was really, the boom had peaked by then. So what does he produce? Lots and lots of images of mines. So the Ferris Haggerty mine, you guys have that one, I think. The Copper Giant was owned by Buffalo Bill. Anybody ever heard of the Ferris Haggerty? Okay. Have you ever heard of the Montezuma? The Almeda? The Elk Mine? The Jesse? So I think what I'm trying to point out in this is that these are promotional, right? He's trying to get into selling these to the mine owners for investment purposes. Go ahead. He also sketched the Great Tramway, leaving the Ferris Haggerty, going through tram station number 2, going through the town of, I didn't touch it. Going
All right. Technical difficulty. There we go.
Going through the town of Encampment and into the smelter. And so I think that was something else he was obviously interested in. Go ahead. He went across the border to Colorado and sketched the Pearl Mining District. This is just outside of Cowdery, so maybe only 4 or 5 miles from Wyoming, but he sketched the Pearl Smelter, the town of Pearl, the Swede Mine. I think you guys own that one too. And these are all just across the border in Colorado. He sketched other businesses. If you're ever in Encampment, this is the only brick building in Encampment that dates from the period, the E&H building. He sketched Perriam's Hotel, probably where he stayed, and Richmond's Livery, probably his conveyance. I love the two views of the Carbon Timber Company. So the Carbon Timber Company cut ties on the headwaters of the North Platte and the Encampment rivers, floated them down those rivers to Fort Steele, where they had a boom across the river, and then loaded them up onto train cars. If you look at Google Earth, you can still see at Fort Steele. Now, old Fort is way back here in the distance, but you can see where this rail line went. So, okay. My favorite, though, is his view of the bird's eye of the South Park vegetable gardens in Encampment. I thought that was just kind of bizarre until I did a search for J.J. Wambaker and found a great article about the vegetable man. This is at 7,000 feet, and he is growing. The garden contained beds of radishes, lettuce, cabbage, beans, peas, turnips, parsley, spinach, pumpkin, squashes, cucumbers, beets, celery, potatoes, etc. I just love that. I mean, obviously, mining town, you have a market for produce, The smelter is still there kicking out smoke, so we know all why we're there, but he's made this very pastoral view of the gardens. He sketched towns around there. Battle, which was right up on the Continental Divide. Dillon, which was the free town outside of the Ferris Haggerty mine. 3 different views of encampment. This is the town of Elk Mountain. Rambler, which was nearby, and then Riverside, which is the only place you can eat after 8 o'clock if you're staying in encampment. I know that.
Yes.
Okay. I love his 2 views of Dillon. He included 1 in each book. He's basically doing repeat sketches, right? This is what Dillon looks like in June of 1903. This is what it looks like by August of 1904. Look how much bigger it is. Now, if he'd gone there in 1910, it'd have seen nothing because it was all gone by then. All right. He sketched towns on the edges. He sketched Saratoga a couple times. Walden is the furthest, Colorado is the furthest south one that he sketched. I already mentioned Laramie. This is Jim Baker's cabin, which was in Savory. And then Dixon and Baggs. I know you guys probably knew those just already by the images, right? Well, they sure did in Savory. They were pointing things out. I had to blow those up. Okay. And then he sketched these 2 that you all have been through. So why don't you tell me what those 2 are? They're actually, for you guys, they're I-80 West. I didn't correct it for my Pinedale.
Is that Elk Mountain?
No.
Bosworth.
Bosworth. These are good guesses. Go ahead and click. Wamsutter at the top and Wolcott on the bottom. Okay. I took and gave a copy of the book to the Wamsutter Library on my travels the other day. The Wamsutter Library is smaller than this room. It's a single wide mobile home, and they were thrilled.
Oh, I'm sure they were.
Okay. He sketched ranches. He'd been sketching ranches throughout his career. Lots of ranches all around encampment. The Big Creek Ranch is a big one if you're coming up from Colorado. Hagelin Brothers Ranch. Here is Elk Mountain, here and here. Clearly seen there. Here's the Toothaker Ranch I showed you earlier. So lots of sketches of ranches. Go ahead. Then he did these interesting topographical maps. These were the inserts of each of the 2 books. Newspaper reports said that this one was worth $1 cost of the whole book of the first one. And then the Battle Lake Basin one is really interesting because I actually stopped there the other day and it took a picture. The end of the highway goes right. You can stop right there. There's a nice viewpoint of Battle Lake. Go ahead. Look at this one, though. This is the relief map of the Grand Encampment Mining District. So he's put all the mining districts. He's put all the different towns, all the different mines. He's put the watersheds and shaded them so it's 3-dimensional. We can see the aerial tramway. And then if that weren't enough, he's added the national grid on top of it so you can see the section numbers all the way across, which is a pretty amazing amount. I tell people this is sort of, see, what did we come up with? It's Edwardian GIS because it's geographical information systems. You put a lot of information on this one map. Go ahead. He also sketched animals, and there's a new part of environmental history that looks at animals and how we use animals as humans changes over time. So we can actually deconstruct how we think about animals to tell us something about humans at the time. For example, Antelope and Pass Creek, at present, the basin is occupied by valuable stock ranches, he wrote in his first book, and antelope have disappeared, suggesting that the stock ranches are valuable, but the antelope aren't. Okay, he sketched Duke a prized Hereford. He sketched this interesting one of a sheep bridge in which they basically put a wagon down to allow the sheep to cross through. In Arizona, where I live, there's lots of elk, and you can see harems like this, but you don't see that many bull elk in any harem. It's usually one bull elk and then lots of cow elk, but the ones with the antlers look better. Okay, go ahead. And then the 2 favorite ones, this one, breaking a road. And you can see he's left-handed, and so he always leans back his handwriting. But that's basically an early Wyoming snowplow. You've got 2 guys with horses pulling a dead tree with a band of sheep stomping down the snow behind them to allow this sheep herder's wagon to traverse the road. What a great, interesting use of animals. Okay, animals as snowplow. And then this one of the Hardin and Hardman slaughterhouse in Laramie was produced. It had burned to the ground, and they rebuilt it, and this is the image that he made of it. What I love about this is, if you take a close look, you'll see pretty much every animal that will be turned into food somewhere in the picture. Pigs, turkeys, geese, ducks, chickens, sheep, cows, maybe horses. So it's sort of that sort of process, sort of a suggested process of what could go on here. He also did these really interesting historiated letters. These go back to illuminated books of the Middle Ages, in which you take the first letter of a paragraph and make it larger and then put some kind of an image in it. And he does this in his books. W for wolf, S for sheep, C for cow, B for bronco, T for Texas Longhorn, S for more sheep, C for I don't know, O for I don't know, C for cow, and R for I don't know. But he includes these. And I think what this just suggests is that he was aware of the craft of bookmaking and different ways to bring illustrations into his work. His 2.5 years in encampment were his most productive. More images, but also with the 2 books, we have a collections of it. And so mines, ranches, the topo maps, towns, businesses, animals, this is where most of his work is known as an encampment. Okay, one more part. You guys still okay? How are the scientists back there? Okay.
Where was that logging? The river's full of logs.
So that was at Fort Steele. Yeah. Although not at Fort Steele itself, but where the North Platte crosses the UP there. Okay. So by the fall of 1904, it becomes clear to Houghton and encampment that he's not getting more mining prospects. And if you're not getting more potential mines to draw, it suggests that the boom is probably leveling out and maybe busting. And so he got out in the fall of 1904 and began looking north. He also moves away from doing mines and doing ranches and primarily doing city views. Why would that be? Why draw a city rather than a mine or a ranch? Yeah, and there's more market to sell city views than that one family or that one mine owner. So you can click, I actually show where he goes, click on him a couple times here. He goes, keep going. He should pop up down here. Well, I'll just tell you. He sketches Wheatland, he sketches Fairbanks, he sketches near Lance Creek, he sketches Douglas, he sketches Casper, Hole in the Wall, Buffalo, Sheridan, Wolf, Banner, Bighorn, Dietz, and then all the way up to the Kendrick Ranch. And we'll hit all these. So can we go forward?
I like the lakes.
There, they go. They're popping up. See them?
Okay.
Okay. So his view of Wheatland, he was hired by the Wyoming Development Company, which was the company bringing water to Wheatland. This is the cover of the book. Now, as a marketing tool, I'll tell you this. It's not the best idea to put a small town on the cover to try to sell books. Okay. But the publisher liked it because you got that beautiful view of Laramie Peak. And if you actually start looking at it, you can see where the irrigation ditches are and that all these people are prospering because of it. It's a really good example of that. This showed up in one of the local newspapers, and it's probably an example of one of the small images he was making to make the bigger image. This is Fairbanks. Anybody ever heard of Fairbanks?
Yes.
Where is it?
It was a copper mine city close to, it's over by Jersey.
Absolutely. And so he probably was attracted to, hey, there's another copper mine? Sure. Go ahead. So in the book, I write, there are no known images of Douglas. We know he was there, but there are no known images. Well, about 2 months after the book came out, I was cleaning a shelf. And I found this postcard that I had bought a long time ago and forgot to include it in the book. But this is the only known image of Douglas, and it appears on a postcard, another revenue source for his work.
So you have a date.
We do have a date. It's 1906 is the cancellation date. This view of Guernsey I found in a newspaper, and it was reduced to a two-tone, which is why it's such poor quality. But that's the only image I've ever seen of his Guernsey view. This is an interesting one. I need to tell you a little story about this. So this I found at the Amon Carter Museum in Dallas, Fort Worth. And it just said unknown Wyoming ranch, MD Houghton. And my wife, who is an archivist, said, write to them, email them, and ask them the provenance, ask them how they acquired it. And they wrote back and said, we acquired it from an estate sale in 1967 for Ad Spa. Well, I went back and put Ad Spa into the system before and found out that he was a cowboy who came up with John Kendrick from Texas, actually wrote a book about his life in Wyoming. He had multiple ranches in central Wyoming, and he was the founder of Manville, Wyoming. Which, have you ever been to Manville? Okay. So I got it busy on the internet, started looking around at different Addison Spa ranches and found the 77 ranch, and found that a man named Bud Reed owned the 77 ranch near Lance Creek. And I started looking, and I found that that had been granted a Wyoming Centennial Ranch honor, and there were some images on the internet, and it looked kind of like this. So I did a little more searching and found Bud Reed's phone number and called him. I said, can I text you an image of this? But I think I have a drawing of your ranch from 1905. Can you verify it? And he said, no. No text, no cell phone coverage. Okay, can I email it to you? No email coverage. Okay, can I mail it to you? Sure. Mailed it to him, followed up a month later, and he said, yeah, that's my ranch. My grandparents bought it in 1936. All those buildings were there. None of them are there now. In 1950, we tore down the main buildings and put our current house there. So that was wonderful. And I had a nice conversation with him. When I was writing the book, I included all this information in the caption for this image. And the Amon Carter Museum, who has proof, to prove it, said, we listed it as unknown Wyoming ranch. That's how you have to list it too. Because for reference. And I said, well, okay, if you want to be silly about this, I'll shame you into fixing it. And so I wrote, although the Amon Carter Museum lists this as an unknown Wyoming ranch, in fact, it is the Addison Spa 77 ranch near Lance Creek. And they were perfectly happy with that. So that's what the caption says. So just a little sidebar. But I think it's only one of two ranch drawings north of encampment. Go ahead. He sketched Casper in 1905, Hole in the Wall in 1905. There's that view of Buffalo that first got me interested in it. When I showed this in Buffalo, the people in Buffalo gave it another twist that I had never thought of. They said, oh yeah, that's what Clear Creek looked like before the Army Corps of Engineers channeled it, which I thought that's a really interesting take as well. And I don't know, she looks like she's pretty tall.
Yeah. But
Okay.
I'm taller than me.
Munker's coal mine was a small family operation near where Lake DeSmet is today. And then here's his view of Sheridan, 4 feet by 8 feet tall. I've already talked a little bit about that and showed some of the things that you can see in that. Just a really, I think this is his best work. Here they are as well. And then all the things, I mean, you can see the cemetery, the courthouse, you can see Fort McKenzie, the Sheridan Inn, just lots and lots of detail. I mean, if you were a local historian there, you could take this and go house by house and figure out what was there in 1905. Go ahead. We also see another revenue source. He took a picture of this and they began giving it away for anyone who took a newspaper subscription. So you could get a 14 by 31 print of this view if you bought a 1-year subscription to the Sheridan Post, which I thought was pretty interesting as well. And I actually have a copy of one of these. It's in really bad shape. We also see a couple of other things that appeared in local papers, which were probably the drawings made for the bigger picture of the courthouse and of a small hotel. He sketched the small town of Dayton the year that it incorporated, and this appeared as a postcard. He sketched Bighorn City. Remember, he'd been in Bighorn in the 1880s. He came back. Anybody know what this little building is in Bighorn?
That's school.
That is Wyoming's second college. That is the Wyoming Collegiate Institute, which lasted about 2 years. So Bighorn was not the place to go to college. Interestingly, though, he did not sketch any of the big ranches around Bighorn, like the Moncriefs or the Wallops or any of those, the polo players, which is interesting. He sketched the two of some of the coal mining towns north of Sheridan, Dietz at the top, Monarch at the bottom. I mean, this Dietz one is just classic. I mean, look at how much smoke is in there. Okay, that is progress. That is industry. You shared this one with me, or somebody shared this one with me from here. When you guys had your exhibit a couple years ago, I was told, actually, who's your registrar?
Now it's Mariah.
Mariah shared this with me and said that a cowboy from Sheridan came down, saw your exhibit, and said, I have one of those, and then donated helping the mess wagon, copyright 1906, which is on the Kendrick Ranch. We don't know if that's the Wyoming Ranch or the Montana Ranch, but I love it because it's a watercolor, it's an action image, and it's, again, one of these unknowns that comes forward, and I think that's just beautiful.
Water damage.
Yeah. So, click again. I've talked about animal history. What about fish hatcheries as animal history? Go click one more. So he sketched 2 fish hatcheries in Sheridan. And I hate to tell you this, but this one is improperly labeled here at the State Archives. But if you know anything about fish hatcheries in northern Wyoming, most people know about the Sheridan hatchery at Story, which goes back to 1909, except these predate this. This is the first Sheridan fish hatchery, which was at the Wolf Brothers Ranch the Eden Brothers Ranch at Wolf. And this is probably the only known image of that. The trout farm of S.H. Smith was a private entrepreneur fish hatchery, and that's near Banner. And when I was in Buffalo the other day, they were saying, oh yeah, this kind of looks like Tunnel Hill, and this is the edge of Moncrief Ridge, and they were, anyway. So I started looking up S.H. Smith and articles about fish farming in Sheridan, and basically he was growing trout, rainbow trout, and then putting them in barrels and taking them to Sheridan where they put on the railroad and to be shipped anywhere. So, you know, and when I talk about this, when you're introducing rainbow trout into lakes that don't have rainbow trout, you're really introducing an exotic species and really turning the natural environment into a hybrid environment, which is what environmental historians are talking about all the time. Are there any other examples of something that he has sketched that would show the hybridization of Wyoming's environment, introducing non-native animals? Can you think of any that I've shown you?
The cattle.
Yeah, click on it. Sure, ranches. Okay, and so in a way, as a ranch, sort of like a fish hatchery in that sense. And introduce, these are not native cattle, these are imported. Okay, all right. So he was in Wyoming for about probably in 05 and into 06, and then he went into Montana, sketches a couple places in Montana, and I'll show you those. I only know these 2 of a ranch near Lewistown, Montana, because when my 1994 article came out, 2 months later, there was a letter to the editor saying, I have 2 sketches of how it was work in Montana. And that's where I've seen these. And these are near Lewistown. That ranch was bought in 1935 by the Mennonites, and it's been a Mennonite colony for almost 90 years. He also sketched 2 towns, Big Timber and Dillon. In 1906, they interviewed him in the Butte Daily Post. Go ahead, click a couple right there. And he talks a little bit about his life in Wyoming and his future maybe in Montana. Montana looks very good to me, said Mr. Houghton, after about 30 years of a country which has progressed very little. I don't know where he's talking about. If I can find enough to do here, I shall locate. Wyoming is standing still and has been for years. It is a rich state with plenty of resources, but capital stays away. He then goes on basically to blame the Union Pacific, which came through southern Wyoming heading for coal fields But anybody who comes into southern Wyoming on the Union Pacific doesn't see the nicest parts of the state.
That's true.
Okay. And then it talks a little bit about his work that he's been doing. So I thought it was interesting. I actually found that in Wyoming newspapers with no comment, even though he's really burning his bridges about being in Wyoming. He goes west to the upper panhandle of Idaho, runs ads in Mullen, Idaho. This is Mullen, and this is Wallace, Idaho. These two towns right up there, the Idaho panhandle between just to the east of Coeur d'Alene, and these were silver mines.
Sanford.
Anybody know? So these, he sketches these in 06. 1910, these were both,
State.
no, they were both very close to the big burn of 1910 that engulfed much of the Northern Rockies. Go ahead. And then finally, he moves to Spokane in 1908, and Fanny joins him there. They live out their lives in Spokane. You see him in Spokane directories as a landscape gardener, as an artist, as an illustrator of mines and real estate. And real estate. This is the census. This is a drawing he paints of Valentine to the town that he loves. You can read that yourself. She is wondrous fair, this Indian maid who dwells by the beautiful falls, and primitive jewels of silver and gold, and treasure lands untold are hers, and we lovingly call her Spokane. Well, why was he in love with Spokane? This was the birth of the Inland Empire. Spokane was becoming the Chicago of the Northwest. It had railroad ties to lumber. It had railroad connections to agriculture. It had railroad connections to orchards. It had railroad connections to mines. It was really a booming place. It was a great place for someone who could sell images of what you could develop. Go ahead. So mostly what we find, though, are city views of Spokane. And he sketches 5 different views of Spokane. I want to show you some of those. 5 Mile Prairie with Spokane in the distance. So this is to the north for the 5 Mile Prairie Development League, promotional real estate. Sunset Farms of West Spokane is a really interesting one as well. This is another one of these GIS maps because it's all the stuff, but then he's also included the owner of the land. He's included power lines. He's included alfalfa farms and what they're growing. It's an amazing amount of information in a map again. Okay. I like this one of West Spokane, a little more artistic, a lot more use of the ink wash. The one of Green Acres, which is a small suburban area outside of Spokane, I have another story about. When I was there in 1993 at the courthouse, at the museum, everyone kept saying, you got to go to Marlene's. Marlene's was an Italian restaurant that had a Houghton drawing of Green Acres on the wall. I went to Marlene's. I snapped a picture of it. It wasn't very good. I kept a record that there was a Houghton drawing in Marlene's. And so when I was putting the book together, I thought I need to get that image from Marlene's. So I did a Google search and found out that Marlene had died in 2017 and the restaurant closed. And so I found an obituary, found a husband, found a phone number, called him one day and left a message that said something like, 30 years ago, I was in your restaurant in Spokane, and I noticed on the wall you had a Merritt Dana Houghton drawing. You know what happened to that? 10 minutes later, I get a call back and says, yeah, I know exactly what happened to that. I love that. When Marlene died, she was buried in a city cemetery, and I gave the drawing to the cemetery, and it's hanging in their office. And so he went back to the cemetery and took a picture of it for me for the book. So I thought that was pretty cool. He didn't argue about the caption at all. Go ahead, Sir Blake. And then this is his last urban view, this view of Spokane, and this is at the Library of Congress in 1915. Now, if we're talking about drawing every city building to make a bigger one, that's a lot of buildings to draw. And to show the detail of each of those, if you start looking at this and know Gonzaga, you can find 5 different railroads. Spokane, you can find Gonzaga College in there. It's just amazing. And I did a blow up on the next one right there. You can see the Northern Pacific Railroad Station in Spokane. Pretty amazing image. And you just kind of wonder how long did it take him to do this? One more image. And after everything I've told you, I want to throw you a little bit of a curveball. I had long wondered about this image, the Empire Coal and Coke Company, which was held by the museum in Spokane. I had no idea where it was. Now with newspapers.com, I could do some research. This says Empire Coal and Coke Company, see C.A. Bryan. So you Google C.A. Bryan, and you Google Empire Coal and Coke Company. Go back. And you find out that they were not really mining coal or coke. It was a paper company. I don't mean they were producing paper. I mean they were swindling investors. And the two guys who were building this company had invested about $500 and acquired about $700,000 worth of capital. They were eventually arrested and found guilty and sentenced to jail terms. Houghton is never involved. C.A. Bryan is never involved. But when I actually found out this is on the border between British Columbia and Alberta, and I'm just about done, it doesn't look like that. It's much lower. It kind of looks like South Pass. It does have those kind of mountains. I kind of wonder if M.D. Houghton, 69 years old, went there and actually sketched that, or if one of those guys came over and said, hey, I know you do this kind of work. We have something up in the mountains. Can you draw something for us for investors? Kind of makes you wonder. If you want to wonder with that, then you wonder about all those Wyoming drawings too. Kind of wonder a little bit, except for those newspaper accounts talk about it being in all those places. So it's just a little bit of a curveball though. So last bits, he writes a letter to somebody in Laramie in 1914 talking about which of his images he still owns. And in the last years, go ahead. They catch influenza. Influenza goes through Spokane in 3 different waves. They get in the 3rd wave. He and his wife die within 16 hours of each other in 1919. I tell you that because I was writing this during COVID. It's a little bit chilling to write about the flu epidemic while you're in the pandemic, and reading about the hospitals being overrun. Arizona was leading the nation, and COVID for a while. It's a little bit bizarre. Go ahead. So the book is the first published by the University of Wyoming Press. There's over 200 images. There are 15 color images. And the last part is a portfolio of the best of the 50 images that survive. So, and I want to thank all those places, especially the Wyoming State Archives and Museums, which donated all of their images for the book. They didn't charge me a penny, so thank you.
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
Said her niece from Wyoming came to take care of her.
Yes, she had a niece who lived in the Midwest, and she had come up to Spokane to take care of her. Interesting, as you're reading the newspapers, a week after they both died, the city was fumigating the house, and somebody broke in and stole a bunch of things.
Oh,
But it was all of her personal property, so she must have taken the images out. I think you guys know, I think the Wyoming State Historical Society bought them within a couple of years, bought a big collection. So the biggest collections are, well, I'm the biggest collection now, but you guys have a lot of originals. The Grand Encampment Museum has about a dozen originals as well. Carbon County has a couple. Savory has a couple. The Northwest Museum has a few in Spokane. So enough. I've been talking way too long.
tell me about the University of Wyoming Press. You're the first book?
Yes, so the University of Wyoming Press is a new imprint of the University Press of Colorado. So the University Press of Colorado is sort of their godfather, and the staff works with that, but also works with people at UW. And when I heard about this, I actually proposed this to them because I thought this was a good book to have for Wyoming, because it's about mostly Wyoming. So
And who do you contact?
Just
Is it in
Google
your
University of Wyoming Press,
Okay.
and you'll go to their page. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yes.
Mike, at the end, you touched on this when you looked at the image of Spokane, how long it must have taken him to do that. And the one that struck me was Sheridan, and how long it would take just to do that.
You gotta wonder.
And did he contract with the city in order to do that?
Not that I know of.
Okay, that's interesting. So he would just sell it.
Yeah, and so I probably maybe contracted with the paper because they were printing reprints of it and giving them away. Now, if you go back and we look at the dates for those, we know when he was there making preliminary sketches, I think in August of 05. The newspaper was selling prints of it in January of 06. What I try to think about though is, how do you draw on something 4 feet by 8 feet? I mean, he had to have been drawing at times upside down. Or he maybe had a big easel and a ladder. I don't know. I mean, it seems
Was
really
it on
hard.
Paper?
Yeah, it's paper.
And you said that's in Sheridan. Where is that in Sheridan?
It was last known by me to be at the city hall. But when I was in Sheridan, I was there on the weekend and it was not open. So, but it was bolted to the wall 30 years ago. I would imagine it's probably still there. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, there's amazing amount of information. Anybody else?
What was your biggest surprise?
I think the biggest surprise was the Illustrated Monthly. I mean, I never saw references to that, and thank God for the Wyoming Digital Newspaper Project, because they took that 1 month of a newspaper and digitized it and put it up there. So you all can go look at that. It's amazing. I think that was probably the biggest surprise. Maybe putting Wheatland on the cover. Okay. It's just, I mean, what else but Wheatland? I mean, it's such a beautiful view. I mean, it's always fun, the little stories that I shared about, the Amon Carter Museum. It's fun to me to do the detective work, to find new information. It's fun to find, to know when he's someplace and then be able to retrace him and to look at the papers. And it's also fun to read in the papers how it was down the muddy at the Sun Ranch, at the Ernest Ranch, and know that he was at other ranches that I've never seen images of. When I find the view, when I figured out the one at Lance Creek, well, that's the furthest east in that area. Are there other ones out there that I've never seen? Or the one up at the LX Ranch for the Kendrick Ranch? Are there more up there? A lot of those ranch drawings have remained in the family. So unless you go ranch to ranch, with your milk cart and saying, have you seen this ranch? I don't know if you ever find them.
Was MD ever mistaken for doctor?
Not that I have found, but when you're doing searches, MD becomes a problem. Because if you search MD Houghton, even in quotes, you oftentimes get MD at the end and then Houghton at the beginning. And there was some Houghton who was the mayor of Cheyenne in the 1890s. And that was a big problem because that meant every Cheyenne newspaper had an article about someone named Houghton that I had to go through. So, I would just do a search and pull up every article and then just go through it and read it. Make clipping. If you're ever doing that, screenshots is an easy way to do that, and then just save it. I would save them as PowerPoint because PowerPoint's a great archival resource because you can then rearrange things very easily. So,
Well, and Mike, when you see all that he's done, you would assume that he was very successful. Do you have the sense of that?
he lived to be almost 70. I don't know if he's ever. I don't know. It's hard to really assess that. The fact that he was always on the move, I don't know. I don't know what it would have taken to be successful at that time. He was clearly gone a lot. And in the book, I spent a lot more time talking about what Fanny's doing. Because she shows up a lot of times, but he's gone a lot. I don't know. It's hard to tell. It'd be great if we had a stat sheet on how many of those images. I know he's probably made more than I'm making so far going around doing it. I need to go by subscription. No, maybe that's not going to be like a good plan. So I don't know. That's hard to tell.
Do you have any idea of what kind of home Yeah, I think that would stay.
Yeah, I mean, it was downtown, not downtown, but it was Laramie, sort of, Laramie, by old Laramie High School, so, to the east, not to the east, let me think,
East and north.
to the, I can't think of it, so it'd be, as you're going to the university, it'd be to the right on Grand Avenue. I don't know which direction that is right now.
North. If you're on Grant.
If you're on,
Are you going towards the?
if you're going towards the university on Grand, aren't you going east? So it'd
From,
be
from downtown?
from downtown to the PUW. And then if it's to the right, it would be to the south, right, Avenue. I've just been in 9 towns in 10 days. Yeah, I don't know where anything is anymore. It's also been fun, like I said, finding them and then trying to retrace, routes and things. So
Was there any evidence of him keeping journals? Nothing.
visual journals,
Yeah.
so. But I've been doing this with Stimson. He and Stimson are contemporaries, and you have to wonder, there's no correspondence that I know of between the two, but they are oftentimes sketching and photographing the same place. Stimson photographed encampment. He photographed all these places up in the Union Pacific. I don't know if he photographed northern Wyoming so much, but he's photographed a lot of the places. And at some point I sort of thought maybe a book about the tooltip would be interesting. But then when I found so much on Houghton, I thought that sort of deserved its own thing.
That's amazing.
Anything else? Any other
Very,
questions?
very interesting.
Yeah,
Thanks.
very interesting.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Sure.
How long did it take you once you
Yeah.
decided on the book?
Well, remember I started on this in 1988,
Okay.
so it's taken me about, 35 years
Right.
to do it. But once I decided to do the book, well, I was invited to give a talk in 2018, and I did some of the research in 2018 for that talk, and then so really about 2 years of research, and then it took a long time for the production of the book because it was COVID and people weren't working, and it just took forever.
I have to tell you, people worry this at Flagstaff. They have highway signs out there with the electric lights. Watch out for elk, and they mean it because I almost ran into it. Heard about it.
But our elk are not native. We brought all of our elk from Wyoming and Montana. They imported them from Yellowstone. So. Anything else? If anyone wants to get a book, I'd be happy to sign it.
Yes.
Yes, please check out the store.
Yep.
They've got 10 copies over there for sale, so there's enough for everybody. And please be sure to join us next month on July 13th. We have Dave McKee talking about Fort Hill Kearney.
Great. Sorry, I
Thank
went
you
over
very
so
much.